You don't recognize the value of education until it's out of reach. Hi, I'm Dorian Bess, an African-American single mom who's been criminal justice impacted, serving 2 bids over 18 and a half years of incarceration. I am also an advocate to all things trauma, including incarceration, mental health, substance use, not only inside, but in my communities. The saying, it takes a village to raise a child, well, it takes education as well to raise our generations so that they understand what the true values in life are. Education opens up a whole different mindset, a whole new world, a whole new vocabulary. You start to think and believe that you can do more with your life. So on my first bid, we did have access to education. And all of a sudden, after 10 months into the program, it was pulled. Little did we know, they were pulling the Pell and TAP grants. That hopelessness that I had, saying, you know what, education is not gonna happen for me. I don't have the money to do it. That hunger, coming home and walking into a job with a bachelor's, even the time that I served, a master's degree, would put me at a higher pay grade right now. I wouldn't have to work 2 jobs. African American women are at the bottom of the employment totem pole. Now we're seeing a huge success rate of women completing college, getting doctorate degrees. Young women who say, I'm not gonna be that statistic anymore. I'm going to do whatever it takes for me to be successful. And usually it's through education. And a lot of women inside have that hunger. But when it's not available to you, it's like you feed that hunger with something else. Or you just say, you know what? It's not designed for us, and you give up on yourself. And being incarcerated and uneducated really promotes not an autonomy to move forward, but it takes you back some years, because when you come out, you're really behind the ball, because now you've sat all that time with your mind doing absolutely nothing, and you come home and you feel hopeless. There's no hope in moving forward, and it takes a minute to get out of that black hole of hopelessness, not having education available. It's important that we keep ourselves educated so that we can keep the next generation growing and growing and growing. Because it's just not about incarceration. It's about rebuilding communities over and over and over and over and over again. That's how you move forward. That's how you build communities. You teach.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today on what is a very important Turn on the Tap Advocacy Day. My name is Daiwan Tatro. I'm the Senior Government Affairs Officer at the Bard Prison Initiative and also an alumnus of the program. I spent 12 years in prison. I earned a bachelor's degree from Bard College, and that education, that degree radically changed the trajectory of my life. You know, besides my work today at BPI, I'm also a senior advisor at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee in DC, doing really, really important political work to hold the House in a really tough political moment. So with that said, that's me. Some of you may know me, some of you may not. You will get to know me better over the course of the next hour. Let's launch into today, because we're going to hear importantly from advocates, legislators, formerly incarcerated leaders on why now, here in 2022, after over 2 decades, it is finally time to restore tuition assistance program funding to incarcerated people and give them equitable access to a program that should be open to all New Yorkers. We all should have a right to education. And so prior to 1994 and 1995, respectively, incarcerated people were allowed and eligible to receive both federal Pell Grants and state level here in New York tuition assistance program and funding for the purpose of college and prison. And policymakers knew it then, and they know it today, that if someone got an education in prison, they were not only the least likeliest to return to prison, but had some of the most successful lives post-release. But the 1994 crime bill ended Pell eligibility at the federal level. We were able to repeal that ban in 2020, and here we are in New York working to repeal the TAP ban that was put in place in the wake of 1994 and 1995 here in New York, that made incarcerated people ineligible from accessing tuition assistance program funding, right? When that ban went into place in 1995, New York, the number of college and prison programs dropped from over 70 to about 4, right? And here we are today, and there are about 30,000 people incarcerated in New York State. 15,000 of them, so 50% of those individuals, have a high school diploma or GED. Less than 1,500, so less than 10%, have access to a college and prison program. When prior to 94, 95, there was a college and prison program almost in every facility. So restoring TAP, tuition assistance program funding to incarcerated people, is extremely important, right? And so it's going to make prison safer, it's going to make our communities safer, but ultimately it is going to give people the tools and skills they need to build better lives for themselves post-release. And that's really what this is about, right? This is an investment in people over prisons. And so with that said, we have a number of amazing speakers here to join us today to talk about the importance of TAP. And the first up, we have Senator Robert Jackson, who is the sponsor of S4464 in the New York State Senate, which repeals the TAP ban. And he took that legislation over from our longtime friend in the criminal justice community, Senator Montgomery, when she retired a couple years ago. And so Robert Jackson picked up the torch, and we are going to hear from him now.
Good morning, everyone. I'm New York State Senator Robert Jackson, and I'm proud to be here today in support of my bill, S4464. And you may say, well, what is that? That is a bill that would restore tuition access program, commonly known as TAP, award for people who are incarcerated, is critical for their future and for the betterment of our society. It will help disrupt the cycle of incarceration that continues to target Black and Brown and working class communities like those that I represent. So ring the bell. Turn on the tap. Until 1995, incarcerated persons at state correctional facilities were eligible to receive TAP, Tuition Assistance Program, awards to pursue higher education at our world-class SUNY and CUNY system. And I'm proud to be sponsoring Bill S4464 to repeal the ban that has since prevented people who are incarcerated from receiving these opportunities. Education is the key to uplifting all people. I know I was uplifted via education. These awards should be made available once again to anyone incarcerated who wants to pursue their education to improve their lives when they get out of incarceration. It just makes sense. So ring the bell for TAP. Thank you.
And so I just want to take a moment to underscore an important point that Senator Jackson made there at the top of his speech. The TAP ban has disproportionately impacted Black and Brown people. We know the majority of people incarcerated in New York are Black and Brown. And so besides this being an educational equity issue, it is also a racial justice issue, right? This ban was put in place and it targeted Black and Brown people and further limited them from having equitable access to higher education. On top of a long history we have in this country of excluding Black and Brown people from equitable access to higher education. So just want to take a moment to highlight that before we hear from our next speaker today, which is going to be Crystal Thomas. She is a BPI alumna. And at the heart of the Turn on the Tap campaign are the voices, and the campaign is centered on the voices in the lives of formerly incarcerated people, and mainly those who have earned an education and been able to change the trajectory through their life through that education, right? Because that's what this is about. This is about people, not prisons. And so let's hear from Crystal because she can tell you better than I can.
Thank you, Daiwan. My name is Crystal Thomas. I am a reentry advocate in Syracuse, as well as a BPI TAP Advocacy Fellow. I support restoring TAP eligibility for incarcerated students because I know from personal experience just how beneficial college and prison programs can be. I dropped out of school in the 9th grade when my parents separated. My siblings and I were all but forgotten in the shuffle, and I went through a very dark period where continuing education was not even a thought. I did end up earning a GED and even an associate degree in the years that followed, but I still struggled with personal issues that developed during that low point in my life and were counterproductive to all of the things that I was trying to accomplish. I later earned a liberal arts degree through BPI while I was incarcerated, and it allowed me to achieve growth in an environment it's not often found or even expected. So college and prison was drastically different than any of my educational experience before it. I think in large part it's due to the fact that it was a liberal arts education. So we weren't just reading and writing and discussing topics just to keep busy or to be able to say that we earned the degree. We were literally transforming our minds. I think that the skills we learned went way beyond the classroom. The courses actually inspired me and pushed me not only to expand my knowledge, but also my view of society and my approach to day-to-day situations. I don't think that I would be the person I am today without BPI, yet so many of our incarcerated loved ones are not given the same opportunity. So I want to use my voice to advocate for incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people because we're not lost causes. We're mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, we're residents and neighbors of New York State. More than 90% of the people who are incarcerated will return to the community at some point. So I think it's imperative that the state fosters rehabilitative options like college and prison so that more incarcerated people can be given opportunities to use the time they spend removed from community and prepare themselves for a true second chance. College and prison programs reduce recidivism, and this in turn reduces the state's incarceration costs, and it also improves community and family life in disproportionately affected neighborhoods. But in order to increase the availability of college and prison programs, we need New York State to turn on the tap. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. That was amazing and coherent, and you didn't miss a beat. And as Crystal mentioned, she's one of BPI's TAP fellows. We have 4 of those at the moment, formerly incarcerated, directly impacted individuals who earned degrees while they were incarcerated, who are taking the time from their families and busy lives to help us in this campaign forward this legislation because they know what that opportunity of higher education in prison did for them, and they want other people to have that same opportunity, right? And one of the paradigms that we're sort of always set up with in like popular media is that there's some type of trade-off between educating people and in prison versus educating, individuals back in their communities. And I'm going to tell you, there's not, right? No tap dollar going to any incarcerated student takes a tap dollar from any other student in New York. And that is really, really important to note, right? TAP is a um, entitlement program, right? And it is allocated on a needs basis, right? And incarcerated people have needs just as any other student should have access to that program. And next up, we're going to have Khalil Anderson, Assemblyman Khalil Anderson, who is the prime co-sponsor on Turn on Tap legislation, bill number 2232 Aubrey in the Assembly, to share with us why he is pumped up, energized, and working on an inside track to get this done this session for incarcerated students.
Greetings, my name is Khalil Anderson, and I proudly serve as a member of the New York State Assembly, representing the beautiful 31st Assembly District in Southeast Queens and the Rockaways. I am also a vocal advocate for expanding higher education access for everyone, including our incarcerated individuals as well as justice-involved individuals in our communities. Now, I was pleased to hear Governor Hochul's announcement and commitment to turning on the tap, which reverses the ban on state financial aid and expands educational opportunities for our incarcerated community members, which is so key and important in this moment. For more than 2 decades in New York State, doors of opportunity have been closed and unjustly closed, and pathways to higher education fundamentally blocked for incarcerated members of our community, with a ban on TAP funding in our state correctional facilities. The time is now for New York State to step up and seize this moment and help drive down rates of recidivism and rehabilitate and restore. That's how we will heal our communities in this moment. I want to thank all of the advocacy groups. I want to thank my colleague, Jeff Aubrey, who serves as an assembly member here in the borough of Queens, and my colleagues in government for laying the groundwork for a historic moment, and this historic moment in particular, before us. But we're not done yet. I stand ready to continue to fight to expand educational opportunities for our incarcerated community members, turn away from long-standing cycles of excessive and unjust punishment, and invest in the futures of our families, our economy, and our community. Let's make sure that this legislative session, we turn on the tap.
Thank you, Khalil, and thank you for co-sponsoring, a prime co-sponsor on very important legislation. And I just want to note that, the Assemblyman took the time at the end of the fall semester last year to visit with Barred Prison Initiative students at Eastern Correctional Facility. And that visit had a really deep impact on his support for this campaign. And so thank him for taking that trip, and thank him again for supporting this legislation. But he pointed to something really, really importantly there, and we're building up to this today, is that the governor has announced that she's going to include TAP restoration in her executive budget. So what are we doing here today? People may ask, if the governor is doing this, why do we need support? Well, first and most importantly, that we know that there are people who will push back against the governor's announcement, who disagree with educating incarcerated people despite the college and prison being in the public interest. But more importantly, in order for this legislation to pass in the executive budget, we need the Senate and the Assembly, respectively, to also include TAP restoration in their one House budget. And then the repeal will pass within the broader budget when that is voted upon. So that is what we are doing here today. That is what we are working to ensure. And here now in 2022 is the time to get this done. And I don't think there could be anyone more better placed to speak to sort of the importance of college in New York in general and why, from a higher education perspective, we should be supporting Turn on the Tap than our next speaker, who is going to be Lola Brabham from Kiku. And so please welcome Lola Brabham, the 9th president of the Commission on Independent Colleges and Universities of New York, a nonprofit organization that represents New York's 100 plus independent colleges and universities on issues of public policy.
Hello, I'm Lola Brabham, president of the Commission on Independent Colleges and Universities in New York, better known as CICU. We represent more than 100 private colleges that enroll 40% of the 1.2 million college students in New York. On behalf of New York's independent sector, we're proud to support Turn on the Tap and the effort to restore TAP eligibility to incarcerated students. For too long, incarcerated individuals have been unfairly left out of New York's signature student aid program. Restoring TAP to those in prison will not take TAP dollars away from any other students. In fact, for every dollar invested in prison education programs, there's a $4 to $5 return for taxpayers. Access to education is transformational. It's an important tool in combating the school-to-prison pipeline and in changing the course of life for so many. Earning a college degree reduces recidivism, improves job readiness, and makes communities safer and healthier. And we know that adults with higher levels of education are less likely to depend on safety net programs. It's time for New York to turn on the tap and help all students achieve their highest potential. Thank you.
And thank you, Lola. Very important endorsement of Turn on the Tap from Kiku that you just heard. And I want to take a moment, to talk a little bit about the campaign before we move into our next speaker. I want to tell you a little bit about the campaign. Turn on the Tap is a collaboration of people and organizations that share a mission to center the voices of those directly impacted. Some of the orgs and people currently include the Barred Prison Initiative, the College and Community Fellowship, Hudson Link, New Hour for Women and Children, our friends at Central Synagogue here in New York, the League of Women Voters, New York City, Long Island Social Justice Action Network, Commission on Independent Colleges and Universities in New York, who you just heard from, John Day College Institute for Justice and Opportunity, and others who are formerly incarcerated, and orgs led by those formerly incarcerated who seek to uplift those who have touched the criminal legal system. So a wide range of people and partners supporting this legislation at the grassroots level, at the organizational level, within the Senate, within the Assembly, and now we have that support in the executive chamber with the governor's announcement to include this in the budget. And again, now is the time here in 2022, after over 2 decades, to finally restore tuition assistance program funding to incarcerated people. And with that said, we're going to turn to our next speaker today, who is Jermaine Archer from Hudson Link. And so Hudson Link is a program that works across a number of colleges and universities to facilitate college and prison in a bunch of different facilities here in New York. And so Jermaine, after being wrongly convicted and in prison for 22 years, taught himself law, earned several college degrees, and became an advocate for criminal justice reform. A survivor of the criminal legal system and mass incarceration, Jermaine has grown into an agent of change, working with the Legal Aid Society as a sentence mitigation paralegal to find non-incarceratory methods of resolving court cases and assist returning citizens transitioning back into society. As I said earlier, most of the people who earn degrees in prison return to their communities and work on the ground to change the circumstances and conditions that led to their incarceration in the first place. Jermaine gets education through Hudson Link and is doing just that. So let's hear from Jermaine.
Thank you so much, Dawan. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. I mean, I'm going to get right to the point. TAP is needed. It's vital. I don't know why we don't have it, but I want to just let everyone know bringing TAP back is not being soft on crime. When we had the TAP turned on, the recidivism rate was low, the prison population was low, and public safety was high. They turned off the TAP back in 1995 to executive order, and then all of a sudden they had to build more prisons. So it didn't increase public safety. It's common sense. You have so many people that are incarcerated that educate themselves and rehabilitate themselves and come home and go on to become productive members of society. I'm one such person. I graduated from the Hudson Link for Higher Education and Prison program. 5 weeks upon my release, after 22 years in prison, I landed a job with a law firm. Yes, I'm a paralegal, but without that education, yes, the diploma is important, but without my college education, I would not have been able to change the way I think. And when I changed the way I think, I changed the way I talk, the way I behave. And when college education changed me, it changed the world, because there are a lot of people that really look up to me. I am an influential person, and those people will follow me anywhere. And thank God I'm leading them to college. I'm leading them to rehabilitation and transformation. So I really, really want to thank Governor Kathy Hochul, because I'm not a politician and I don't really endorse politicians, but I feel like she took a chance by putting her stamp of approval and including it in the executive budget, because she understands how important it is to turn the tap back on. If you really, really care about public safety, why would you not want to educate people that are incarcerated? Sometimes they never had the opportunity for higher education. So would you rather, knowing 90% of the people that are incarcerated are coming home one day, who would you rather as your neighbor? The person who lifted weights and watched television for 20 to 25 years, or the person who became educated, who earned a college degree, a college education, rehabilitated themselves, and demonstrated positive transformation? I could sit here and wait for the answer, but it's a no-brainer. So I just want to say the legislature needs to act on this. The governor put it in there. I'm not going to call them marching orders, but it's important. If you really care about your constituents and you really care about public safety, you need to legislate TAP back into New York State. In prison, there should be no discrimination when it comes to education. If you care about public safety, turn the TAP back on. That's all I want to say. Thank you again, Dawan. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jermaine. And as Jermaine said, it is a no-brainer. And so please, you see the ticker tape at the bottom of the screen. Please utilize that link to take action now while you are here with us today. And as Jermaine said, of course, we want to thank the governor. I think, the governor is doing this now, one, because of all the work that the coalition has been doing to get us to this point, but also because we finally have a governor who believes in the power of education. She spent a good deal of time in her State of the State address speaking to the impact of higher education on her life, right? And so not only has she committed to restoring TAP, but she's also committed significant funding to CUNY and SUNY. So we have a governor who's supporting higher education at a very high level, and now we need the Senate and the Assembly to work with her hand in hand to make sure we get TAP restoration done right now in this moment. And the next woman we are going to hear from, and our next speaker, is Romarilyn Ralston, who is now the Executive Director of College and Community Fellowship, which has been the backbone of the Turn on the Tap campaign for several years. CCF is an organization that helps justice-involved women and their families access opportunity in higher education. Romarilyn identifies as a Black feminist prison abolitionist with an incarceration experience. And so let's hear from her.
Thank you so much, Jawan, for that amazing introduction. I'm so excited to be here today. My name is Romarilyn Ralston. I'm the Executive Director for College and Community Fellowship. I just want to thank the advocates, the legislators, the speakers. I want to thank all of you who have come out today to hear why it is important for us to turn on the tap. 23 years ago, I was incarcerated. I spent time in a California prison. I had my first experience with education in a California prison. And I know firsthand the importance of a college education. I am the recipient of post-secondary education. It has helped me to transform my life. And I believe access to higher education, to quality post-secondary education is a right. No one, and I repeat, no one should be excluded from knowledge, especially people who have been historically denied first chances to accessing education. Education is transformative. It's not just for the individual, but for everyone that it touches. It touches our families, our communities. It touches our children. Education has a way of opening up the world to us, and everyone should have an access to high quality education. So now is the time to turn on the tap, New York. I want to thank the governor for including TAP and TAP restoration in the executive budget. That's a great first start. But now we need it to pass. We need the legislature to sign TAP back into law. That's what we need. That's why we are here today. And that's why I'm sharing my personal experiences with you. So I want to thank Dewan again and all of you for coming out today to support this Advocacy Day, to support New York, to support turning on the tap.
Thank you, Romarilyn, and who is just another shining example of someone who got an education while they were incarcerated and are back out in the community, utilizing that education in ways that make the lives of other people better, right? And that's what this is all about: strengthening communities, changing the trajectories of people's lives, giving individuals equitable access to education, allowing them to earn degrees that gives them better and more meaningful opportunities when they return back to their communities. I have an older brother who's been to prison. I have a younger brother who's been to prison, like me. Unlike me, neither of them had access to college and prison throughout their incarceration. And I have watched them struggle in ways that I have had not had to do due to the fact that I not only have an education, but also a degree from Bard College. And so the benefits of a college degree are really, really stark in my life every day. So I cannot stress to you enough the importance of restoring broader access to college and prison to incarcerated men and women all over New York. It is one of the cheapest, safest, smartest things that we can do to make this state better, and again, invest in people and education over prisons and punishment, right? We hear a lot about what are the solutions to this or that problem. This is a thing that we know works, right? We know the average recidivism rate here in New York State is 40%. For a BPI alumni who earns a bachelor's degree, it is less than 4%. That is a stark and radical difference. And not only do those individuals not go back to prison, they walk out of prison after 10, 15, 20 years into graduate and PhD programs at Columbia, Cornell, Yale, NYU, just to name a few, and are working all over New York City, in New York State, to better their communities, right? That's what this is about. I was just at the BPI alumni party in December, and one of my fellow alumni was telling me how he's now sending his son off to college, right? That is radical change. And his son is only going to be the second person in his family to go to college. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. But enough about me for the moment. And let's hear from Jeffrey Fineout, who's also a BPI alumnus and one of our TAP fellows for the purposes of this campaign. And Jeffrey.
Thanks, Daiwan. Greetings, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. It's a privilege to be here and share my experience of college and prison in an effort to highlight the importance of providing access to education in New York State prisons. My name is Jeffrey Fineout. I'm a formerly incarcerated person. I served 10 years in prison, during which time I was very fortunate to enroll with BPI and earn an associate's degree prior to my release in 2019. Since my release, BPI has continued to play an instrumental role in my life. For example, BPI was able to facilitate a consortium between Bard College and Cornell University, which ultimately allowed me to finish earning my bachelor's degree. I graduated in May of last year with a bachelor's in social studies, and in spite of the COVID pandemic, was honored to attend my commencement at Bard College. In addition to being a college and prison program, BPI provides a broad network of reentry support that helps formerly incarcerated persons gain access to things such as transitional housing, continuing education, potential job opportunities, and has been at the forefront of efforts to aid in my ongoing transition into the labor force. I'm a firm believer that having an education is fundamental to everyone's personal and social development. Possessing the capacity to supply individuals with the kind of foundational skills necessary to become productive members of society who contribute in thoughtful and meaningful ways. Furthermore, it is no secret nor coincidence that the overwhelming majority of jobs in the labor market minimally require some form of an education, which certainly speaks to the pragmatic value of having one. But perhaps most importantly, there is a strong sense in which simply having an education leads people to become critical thinkers and make well-informed decisions, which can have a profound impact on both people around us as well as people in distant parts of the world. These are just some of the reasons why having access to an education is of utmost importance for everyone, especially for incarcerated persons who are faced with the uphill battle of reentry. I'm calling on New York's legislators to act. Let's repeal New York State's ban on TAP and pass the Aubrey-Jackson bills. Thank you for your time and consideration. And finally, many thanks to Governor Kathy Hochul for including TAP restoration in the budget.
Thank you, Jeffrey. And Jeffrey there importantly talked about reentry. At BPI, we have what you can call a reentry program where we help our alumni access jobs and opportunities, but that happens in the context of what a college does for any and all of its students, right? And so one of the important things about college and prison in New York is that colleges are able to go independently into prisons, teach classes, those students earn credits and degrees and become alumni of those institutions, right? And that type of building of a community helps effectively reintegrate people back into society and bridge prison walls, right? And so really, really important for us as we restore TAP to think about the ways in which college and prison mitigates how incarcerated people are often marginalized. Sometimes people think the solution to some of the problems in the criminal justice space are to create these separate systems. But college and prison is a shining example of what happens when we welcome incarcerated people, marginalized people, Black and brown people into, on an equal basis, institutions that they have been historically locked out of, right? If it wasn't for the Bard Prison Initiative, I could have never afforded to go to Bard College, right? And so we need to view college and prison in that light and understand that we're welcoming people back to their communities. One of the best ways to do that is through them having a relationship with a educational institution of higher learning, because I think anyone who has been to college agrees that that is a formative experience and that it helped you professionalize yourself, it helped you build networks, it helped you find community, right? Do not assume that those things are any different for an incarcerated man or woman, right? College and prison helps us break down barriers to reentry. And our programs, whether it be Hudson Link, BPI, College and Community Fellowship, individuals at John Jay, all have supports in place to welcome formerly incarcerated students back into their communities. Really, really, really important. And so thank you, Jeffrey, for highlighting that and speaking powerfully about the impact of an education on your personal life. I do want to make a note that Senator Julia Salazar was supposed to be here with us today. I know that there is a committee hearing underway that conflicts, but Julia is a longtime supporter of the Turn on the Tap campaign. She's the chair of the Corrections Committee in the Senate, and also at the end of the fall semester last year, visited with Bard Prison Initiative students at Eastern Correctional Facility. And later on that night, after she had got home, Julia texted me and she said, "Dawan, I visit a lot of prisons all the time, and my position is chair of the Corrections Committee. And I walked out of Eastern today, and it's the first time that I left a facility feeling hopeful," right? And what she meant is that she sat in those classes, in those rooms with those students, and could feel their palpable sense of accomplishment and hope for the future, right? There are so many things in the criminal justice space that don't work, right? But in college and prison, we have something in the higher education space that works. And so really, really important to note. And we are sorry that Julia could not join us today. And so, again, just want to talk about the campaign, and that is a broad coalition of different organizations and individuals working towards a common goal to restore educational equity to incarcerated people in New York. Those organizations range from College and Community Fellowship to Hudson Link to John Jay to Central Synagogue, and across many individual formerly incarcerated advocates and people who understand directly the value of college in prison. And so I do want to take a moment to talk about the cost savings in terms of TAP. A lot of people say, like, well, how much is this going to cost, right? And while we understand that there are some costs on the front end, there's going to be radical cost savings on the back end, right? So for every dollar the state invests in college and prison, it will save $4 or $5 in terms of reincarceration costs. But more broadly speaking, the amount of TAP funding that we're talking about going to incarcerated people, less than 1% of the overall total TAP expenditure. Nonetheless, that small amount of funding is going to make a radical difference across New York's college and prison landscape. It is going to strengthen the programs we already have and also allow new programs to flourish, especially upstate in remote regions where the only schools who can do this work are SUNY institutions that don't have the private fundraising capacity to build out their programs. And as my executive director, Max Kenner, often says, in relation to our work at BPI, there's just going to be 1 year that we're not going to raise the money and we are going to go away. So in order for us to have college and prison at the scale that is mass incarceration in New York, that has always taken a combination of foundation support, private fundraising, Pell dollars, as well as TAP dollars, right? We need to be providing incarcerated people with robust, real access to higher education. In order for that to happen, they too need access to TAP funding. We're at an important moment in this campaign, right? The finish line is within sight, but we all have to keep pushing to turn it. The governor has made her announcement. She has included the TAP repeal language in the executive budget. Now we need the Senate and the Assembly again to include the bills respectively, Robert Jackson's bill, Assembly Member Aubrey's bill in their one house budgets, and we can get this done. But that is not going to happen without sustained pressure and work from this community, right? We can't drop the ball. We can't fumble this package now. And so, on that note, everyone, I want you to take out your cell phone and bring up your QR code scanner. And we are going to put a QR code up on the screen, and you are going to scan that and use that code to take action right now in real time. Let your legislators know that this is something that you support and you want to see it done this session. And trust me, if you're sitting there thinking like whether or not this is going to have an impact, believe me, it will, because when I go to meet with those offices, when other members of the TAP Coalition go to meet with those offices, we are going to be able to say, you are hearing from your constituents. You are hearing from the public. We know people are writing to you about this issue, and we need you to support this legislation, especially at this critical moment where we are on the verge of getting this done. And so with that said, you all are right now should be in your phones taking action. And we have ran a very tight program today. You can see on the TAP campaign, we're effective, right? We are going to get this done. And I am going to be able to give everyone back a few minutes of their time today. And so